Hey everyone, welcome to Eating Enlightenment. I'm here with Ashley Solomon from the Galia Collaborative. And hey Ashley, how's it going?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. Glad to have you on.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk with you today.
And so, for those of you who don't know Dr. Solomon, she's a licensed clinical psychologist, leadership coach, and the founder of Galia Collaborative. She helps girls and women know and grow their power. She specializes in eating, fertility, anxiety, and career issues. And I had a blast reading your biography because I believe it was in second grade, you were writing messages to corporate boards saying, hey, your commercials are only feature guys, and you've continued a path of advocacy and went into journalism to explore stories, but then switched into eating disorders where you studied eating disorders and did some research on resiliency, and you've done a whole lot. And now you're doing your own, well, you have a team around you at the Galia Collaborative. Could we just start off by talking about what you're up to now with this Galia Collaborative?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a journey, I guess, as it always is. So I actually say it Galia Collaborative, although there's really no right way to say it. It comes from, so the actual word is a Lithuanian word that I probably couldn't actually totally pronounce, although I have Lithuanian heritage, but it really means her power. And so the essence of what this organization is all about is elevating women's impact through strengthening their mental wellness and their mental health. And we do that in all kinds of different ways. We definitely do it through, more quote unquote traditional psychotherapy, that kind of one-on-one therapy and coaching support. But we also do it through digital resources, writing, something we call circles, which is getting a group together of like-minded women in a particular topic area, because there's nothing as powerful, in my opinion, as a group of women coming together to share their experiences and really elevate each other. So we try to elevate women by strengthening their mental wellness through things that are accessible and meaningful for them. And a lot of that work tends to center around healing things like relationships with our bodies, our relationships with food that can really kind of distract us from our own power.
And it's not limited to food as well, because you've been doing advocacy, women's empowerment for your whole life.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about, those second grade commercials that you wrote, or even like some other examples about this really a life passion for yours since a young age?
Yeah. I think I was, fortunate, for better or worse. I had for better, because she might listen to this, but a very, a feminist mom who instilled those ideals in me quite early. So she was really the one who, she attuned me to these issues. And then once I sort of had my glasses on that she gave me, I feel like I was able to, and this is where I say for better or worse, to like see all the examples and inequities in all the things going on around me. So what you're referring to with the commercials, I noticed, and I remember going to my mom, that in these commercials for board games that you'd see, like especially around Christmas time as a kid, that they'd always have kind of a mixed gender group playing these games, but it was always the boys that won the game in the end. They were always like the one doing like the celebratory cheer. And I noticed this, and I took on my own little like research study where I like started writing down, instances to see if I could disprove this theory. And it just proved to be true time and time again. So, and actually since then, this has been demonstrated and replicated in like more advanced research than my little, notebook at 7 years old. But there have been real research studies on this that show that actually was the case. And so game makers and toy makers are actually much more attuned to that now, and representing not just, kids of all genders, playing the games, but actually like having success, coming out on top, that sort of thing. So, but I, would write little letters and, do the things that felt like they were within my control at that point in time, to be able to, address these injustices that I saw around me. And, something else similar. Um, I think one of the, well, I was going to say another sort of example of this was when I was a little bit older and playing sports as part of my school system. And my dad was actually like part of the athletic group of parents, or the, group of parents that oversaw the athletics at the school. And he actually noticed some discrepancies in just funding, and really talked openly with me about that. And once I had an issue, then I wasn't going to let it die. So I knew that it would be meaningful for me as somebody that it affected to be able to advocate for how that was negatively influencing like our experience as girls who are, playing sports. So I think a common theme here is really that I had a lot of support, and, and parents who would talk really openly about these things that were going on in the world that weren't right. And I really actually, so now I'm a mom, I have 4 kids, and, and I really try to take that to heart. My kids are still little, but I really try to take to heart this idea that like kids are picking up on all of these things, whether it's gender norms or, racial inequity and so on and so forth. And a lot of times we think that they're too young to really like understand it or to do something about it, but it's so amazing when they actually have some information, because they have this fuel and fire to do something, and they know that their world that they're inheriting doesn't have to be the same. So
When you see commercials on TV nowadays, being a mom, I know in like London, they no longer, I don't think they allow body image commercials anymore, or somewhere in the world they're saying these images out there in commercials with, women on sunscreen bottles and magazines, it's really harmful. And I don't think that's here in the States. But when you see maybe an unrealistic body image or something else that is just not representative, how do you talk to your kids about it? Do you talk to your kids about it? Do you shield them? How do you handle commercials?
that's a great question. My most honest answer is actually that, we get to avoid a lot of commercials. It's not answering your question, but as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm realizing that my kids mostly watch Netflix and Amazon Prime. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's not really that many like live action commercials. That said, they of course get influenced by even the content of the shows, for example. And so, it's an excellent question about like how we talk about that. And one thing I try to do, and as a disclaimer, I am extremely imperfect, of course, at all of this, even when I know better. But what I certainly try to do is to really point out when like reality varies from what they're seeing, first of all. So whether that's, if that's related to like body shapes and size, if there's a show, for example, that, Power Rangers is a good example, even because my kids are obsessed with that right now. If they're watching Power Rangers and you look at all the characters, and there's there may even be like a little bit of racial diversity, but size diversity, like not at all. Everybody is very, conforms to a very kind of traditional ideal of, body shape and size and things like that. So we'll talk about that and challenge that and point that out as like, that doesn't, these people don't necessarily look like the people you see around you in your life. And what do you make of that? And why do what do you think's missing? That's actually so my research in my doctoral work was on media literacy. So it was actually around a lot of these issues and specific to body image. So how do we help? In that research, we were specifically looking at with adolescent girls, could we help to prevent some eating challenges by giving them skills to be able to more critically look at like the media that they were internalizing? So one of the most powerful questions that we found to help kids ask what's missing here. So rather like than even critiquing what is there, like what's not there, what's not represented, so we're not seeing people of color, we're not seeing people of various shapes and sizes, or we're not seeing people, to get into like mental health, like, they're always happy, they don't, have a range of feelings, like help them to see what's not present in the media depictions that they're kind of constantly ingesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
thanks.
so cool. Like, did they pick up on it pretty quick? I mean, it seems obvious to me. They were able to see, oh wow, this is not representative. This is did that
Once you ask the question, I mean, I think that like for any of us, like it has to be like a conscious effort.
Yeah.
I think then once you ask the question, like you don't realize what you're not seeing until you look for it. You know what I mean? And so I think once you ask the question, like kids especially are like, so, they get excited to like figure out, like, it's like a puzzle, what's missing here, what doesn't look like, what I see in my life and things like that. But you do have to bring that to their attention, because otherwise it's just so automatic. Like that becomes the representation of reality.
How did this impact kids' perception of their own body image? Did it kind of change things for them, or how did it affect them?
Yeah. So in the research study that I did, it was a 2-week intervention. So relatively short term. And I don't know to give you all the specifics, but we essentially went into schools, and we did this as like part of their health class, like day after day for a period of a couple weeks. And then we evaluated, how did that impact, or did it impact the way that they perceive their own bodies, like what they endorsed on like their intent to do behaviors like dieting or weight loss and things like that. And so what we did find is that it had a significant effect on improving their body image and in, reducing some of those risky, potentially eating disorder behaviors, which was really cool. We did a 3-month follow-up, and we saw some of those changes stayed in place, but we didn't go beyond 3 months with that study. But what I would guess from what I know and the literature, et cetera, is that it would really have like long-term benefit. You'd have to keep up this practice. We could go in and do this for something really intensive for a couple of weeks, but it's not going to have a long-term impact unless maybe other people in their lives are starting to learn to help them, assess the media that they're consuming. And now, I mean, it's funny that time goes so quickly, but this was probably a little more than 10 years ago that I did this study. And even in that time, I mean, at that time we were talking about like magazine ads and like no one really reads like paper magazines anymore. So it's, I mean, the same skills really apply when you're talking about, social media and things like that, and, TikTok, and, you can ask yourself some of those same questions, but in a lot of ways, it's even more important now, because it's easier when it's social media or it's your friends on TikTok or whatever to think, oh, well, that's reality, because those are like real people. They're not actors, but you're still not seeing the full picture.
Absolutely. And I'm super curious to learn too. I really liked that practical technique basically of what's missing. Mm-hmm. And that helps people with their body image. And in the years since then, there's been a lot of research, a lot more spreading of awareness. Have there been other techniques like that, kind of practical things that someone can do to either challenge their perception or feel better about their body, fat acceptance? What are some other practical things that someone can do? Like, Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we didn't include this in the study at the time, because I think this has evolved more since then, but one of the things we know from media literacy research is that I'm actually going to go back to something you mentioned earlier, to give some context to this. So you had mentioned like in certain other countries, there's, bans, for example, on, well, there's bans on using models, for example, that are under a certain weight that might be, considered medically underweight. There's also other countries that are putting in regulations like you have to label something if it's been airbrushed so that people are aware of that. But what's interesting, I think there's a lot of things in our culture and the American culture that we could do similar to that. But it's interesting that those things I think are great efforts. But what we find is that they don't really like labeling it as having been airbrushed. It's good for us to know, but it's almost like the effect of the photo has already happened by the time then we're like thinking about the fact like, oh, wait, that's not real. That's airbrushed. Our brain just works too fast at just internalizing the picture. So one of the things so it's less, my point with that is we found that it's less helpful to try to correct for what we've already seen, if that makes sense. And more helpful, especially for body image, to actually surround ourselves with images of more diverse bodies, for instance. So like you mentioned fat acceptance. One of the things like I really tell the patients that I work with a lot when they're coming to really develop a healthy relationship with their body is, if they use Instagram, for example, like follow accounts of people of all different shapes and sizes, fashion bloggers, if they're into that are, of various sizes that don't sort of conform to one specific ideal. Because the influence, we know that images, whether we like it or not, are going to have that influence. So let's use that. It's almost like, let's use that for the positive and internalize. If we're going to internalize media, let's internalize media that's really representative of reality and of diversity that we want to see.
Yeah, I like that. I could see someone going home and doing that right away.
Right.
Curious too about Instagram. There's body positivity. There's health at every size. There's all these different kind of movements that are coming out. And I think they're unfamiliar to a lot of people. And one pushback I see oftentimes, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is when people first hear maybe fat acceptance or body positivity, they're saying, oh, it's just like glorifying being fat or justifying being fat or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, how do you approach this topic of obesity,
Yeah. It's an excellent question. And it's it's unfortunately such a sticking point, and I think a conflict, because I think sometimes what happens, like you're saying, is that even if people can relate to some of the tenets of like the health at every size movement, they get really stuck, when it comes to this idea of, but what is that promoting? And is that really okay for me? And what about health? And, all those kinds of questions. And, a few things I think that, so in full disclosure, I'm definitely a proponent of these movements. I mean, particularly health at every size. I think that it's been really misunderstood in a lot of places and among a lot of groups. I think that, the real essence of that movement, and as well as others, and true body positivity, is the idea that bodies are inherently good and worthy regardless of size, shape, even health status, and that there's a way for us to nurture our own bodies and maybe like culturally kind of nurture the acceptance of all bodies, regardless of body shape, weight, or size. And so I think, most of us wouldn't disagree with that, I don't think. So this idea of like the glorification of obesity or that sort of thing just like doesn't, I think it misses the point, and it's more coming from a place of fear. I think there's still a lot of fear around, fatness or body diversity. That what happens if everyone just sort of like does what they want instead of, and I think that doesn't jive with the reality, which is that, body size, just like in any animal species, like exists on a continuum. There will always be people who are larger. There will always be people who are smaller. We actually have relatively little impact over what our kind of genetically predisposed body size is. If we're all sort of, doing what's most like nourishing to ourselves, feeding ourselves in the most nourishing way and moving our bodies and all of that, then, we are, being true to where we should sort of naturally be. So I think sometimes it gets kind of, HAES isn't meant to be, or Health at Every Size, or any of these things. At their heart, they're not really meant to be like a health program anyway. They're really meant to be like a social justice movement, that helps to say that at the very basis, that all people deserve, love, respect, care, access to, healthy food, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So it's a complicated issue. I know we're not going to like solve it today, but it's definitely a complicated issue. And I know people have really strong feelings about it.
Yeah, I hear you. I like that starting place, that we're all worthy of love, no matter what body we're in. And I oftentimes think that coming from this place that my body's worthy, it is healing. I mean, you're going to run differently. You're going to eat differently when you're listening to your body and so forth. So I do think that coming from this place is healthier. And even this word healthy can be quote unquote or whatever, but the opposite of coming from this place is really, we'll say dieting, but when you don't like your body, it's not good enough. You're trying to control everything. Can we just explore a little bit about your experience in the eating disorder clinics? Because it sounded like you've seen it all, and you had switched from journalism to eating, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Essentially, something like that?
Yeah. I mean, during college, so I never worked as a journalist, although I like to pretend that I'm a journalist. So my favorite thing to do. But yeah, when I started college, I had been majoring in journalism and, was really just drawn to women's stories. But my passion for working with, disordered eating predated even that. I think in some ways my like foray into journalism was like, oh, let me get away from this for a while. Let me try to take this other path. And then I was like, no, I know where I'm meant to be. I need to get back to it. But yeah, I mean, I ended up working in, like I said, I'd done my graduate work in this area, but when it was time to really like start to delve into clinical work and working with patients, I really sought out opportunities to kind of work at all ends of the spectrum when it comes to disordered eating. So, everything from college students that might be struggling with body image and, maybe disordered relationships with food to, working on inpatient units with people that had eating disorders for years and years and were very, very ill. So, and the most of my career was spent in higher level of care settings. So places where people were struggling pretty significantly with eating disorders. And what's so cool to me, it was so meaningful to me about those experiences is you really got to see people, like there was like a kind of a concrete like start and stop to that journey. I mean, their journey of course went on, but you got to be part of like a really kind of intense point in that journey where they would go from often coming to that place with a lot of hopelessness about where they were with their relationship with food and body, and getting to leave feeling, ideally, and in most cases, really hopeful and on the right track. And they would, of course, need to continue that work, but just in a whole different place.
I don't see a burp in your contacts. Who would you
Oh,
like?
sorry. That's my very our conversation and weighing in. But yeah, so that was just super meaningful to me to get to be kind of part of these like intense moments in people's lives.
Yeah. What did people come in believing? How did you help them believe differently? Like for someone who's never been to an outpatient program,
Yeah.
and they're really struggling, what's that like? What's the day like?
Yeah.
How do you actually, sit with someone and talk with someone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really unique experience, honestly. I mean, in some ways, I think that everyone at some point in their life should get to have an experience like that. I mean, of course, I don't wish an eating disorder on anyone, um, but just the opportunity to sort of step out of your day-to-day life and do some healing work and introspection, and eat good food and get good sleep and all of that. I mean, it's really, it's transformative for anybody, but especially when someone's really suffering with, a mental illness or a physical illness. So in the outpatient programs that I led for a long time, it was pretty intensive. People would come in. Most of my experience was in what's called partial hospitalization. So people would come in, they wouldn't sleep overnight with us, but they would come in and spend the whole day with us 7 days a week. And, we do everything from things like, yoga, movement, meditation, skill building, music therapy, art therapy, nutrition therapy, psychiatry. Like, it's very comprehensive, which is what's so like amazing about the experience, is you really get to like work with people from every angle and kind of reset things, which is really powerful. And my role as a psychologist is more on the mental side of things, of course, but so we'd focus a lot on ways of approaching your relationship with your body differently, which we'd focus on trauma resolution, how to approach our thoughts more kindly. So a lot of like sort of cognitive and behavioral strategies for kind of managing our lives differently.
And when someone is having these really intense thoughts, how do you work with them? Kind of coming back to the body disorder or the body image thing. Previously, you'd said one way is to examine commercials. We were looking at more of like a media side of things. But if someone has already internalized it and they're believing it and in the grip of it, how do you begin to relate differently to those body image thoughts and reduce them or replace them? How do you work with body image thoughts?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've certainly found, and this even in my own experience, my own life, is the fact that we can sort of only do so much to change thoughts. Our thoughts are, and in some ways, in our efforts to change them, really reinforces them. It sort of gives them more power than they're due. So a lot of the work that we would do with body image thoughts, just like other distressing thoughts, is working on really putting those thoughts in perspective, if that makes sense. So first kind of reducing their power, if you will. A lot of people have just learned to associate their thoughts with truth. Like, if I think it, it must be true. So we start there. Just because you think it, it's not necessarily true. Doesn't mean that it's false either. Can we learn to relate to our thoughts not as like indicators of like what's true or false, but examining our thoughts based on like, is this a helpful thought for me to hold on to, or do I need to release it and let it go? So a lot of that sort of, mindfulness is a huge sort of underpinning of being able to relate to our thoughts like this, because we have to be able to start by looking at our thoughts non-judgmentally, and learning to like relate to them with some distance, rather than being so fused. We talk a lot about trying to defuse and like decouple ourselves from what's going on in our mind, because that's not necessarily a reflection of who we are.
That's
So,
a great, like, first you got to be mindful and you got to realize your thoughts are bubbling up like the wind that's just blowing. And then to examine, like, is this thought even true? Like, if you have a thought, I'm fat and I'm worthless. Well, is that really true? Are you worthless if you're fat? Are you even fat? What is that like? Breaking that down, and then is it useful? Is it? Yeah, those are.
yeah, is it helpful? Because it's not even necessarily like, am I really fat or not? Because we could probably, I mean, I can say I've worked with people and I've probably been there myself. Like, you could have that argument for years. It's relative. It depends on your perspective. So we talk, like, one of my favorite metaphors is the idea of, your mind can become like a tug of war in your brain, and you can keep kind of arguing your thoughts back and forth indefinitely. But if you're caught in a tug of war, like, you're not freed up to do anything else. So we talk a lot about, like, I use the phrase like dropping the rope. Like, the only way out of a tug of war, if it's, you're pretty equally matched, is you have to drop the rope, because otherwise you're going to be stuck in it forever. So we talk about like dropping the rope on these sort of internal debates and saying, I'm not going to even answer the question of like, am I fat? I'm going to think about, is that thought, this is the question I ask people to ask themselves, like, is this thought bringing me closer or further away from like what I actually value? If like what I value is my relationship with my partner, when I have this thought and hold on to it so strongly, does that bring me closer in relationship to him or her? Probably not. And so I'm going to make the conscious choice that I'm not going to let that sort of interfere with my relationship. And I'm going to go, eat dinner with her, even though my body's telling me you shouldn't eat because you ate too much earlier for lunch. So it's all about, how do our thoughts impact our ability to like connect with our values and what's important to us, and choosing what's important to us over whatever random thing our mind might be telling us.
I love
Does
it.
that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And kind of wrapping up here, but I'm also curious because I hear this really like passion working on an individual level from your experience, Ashley. Like, you're just, I hear it. You love working with the intensive, you said intensive and helping people in this intense spot of their lives. But now another value of yours is more cultural systems and broader impact. And I think that might have been one of the reasons you founded the
Gallia. Gallia. Close. No worries. Everyone says it differently. Everyone I know says it differently. And I'm always like, it's up to your interpretation.
What shifted for you there? Going from if it's right in saying that Galia is more about the collective, I guess, collective or collaborative. It's more about broader. Sure. What shifted from, the individual intensive to maybe being more broad?
Yeah, I love that you pointed that out, actually, because I think that that's probably very true for me personally. Like, I value each of those, the system level stuff, the community-based stuff, the individual stuff so much. And I find myself kind of oscillating between them in different ways. I would say that, so on a personal level, I love doing the individual work and that relationship that you build. And I still do a lot of that. And like you said, in building this collaborative, I think obviously it can have a bigger reach. And I hope that we can, affect change on a more sort of systemic level. There's just obviously power in community, power in numbers. And it's part of why we're doing, it's not systems level, but doing this, what we call the circle work, which is sort of like group therapy, just because I think that the path to healing, in my view, is all about, it all happens in the context of relationship. And in community. And so it's not actually like an individual isolative process. It's a very like community-based process. So if we can start even in these circles to like create small communities for people to connect with, there's just so much power that can come out of that. And I hope another big kind of value of like my organization is on a organization level, like partnering with other community resources and organizations. And I think it's a bottom up and a top down approach as much as possible. Like we need systems to change. And as we advocate for that to happen, how do we sort of empower ourselves in our own circumstances?
The power of a group is where it all starts.
Yeah.
If you were, we'll say, just if you could change one system policy, like it's now federal law, it's passed by every single state, and what would that, wave a magic wand type of question here, but what one policy would you pass?
Can I say two?
I'm down for two. Let's do two.
Okay. One, I would, and this is a very personal one to me, but I would change, I would implement more universal like parental leave. And I know that might seem like out here, but I would say that because like parental leave, like maternity and paternity leave are so intertwined into like how we end up seeing like men and women's roles. And it has such an impact on the roles that people like at the start of building a family, like through their lifetime end up playing. And it's my belief that, we can't have like true equality between sexes or genders or among genders until, we do things at the system and policy level, like implementing like fair employment practices and things like that around leave, to allow ourselves to like start off on an equal footing. So I know that might seem a little out there. And then the other one would be, right now, size and weight are one of the only classes, like it's not a protected class. So meaning that someone could be fired, for example, for being too fat. Someone can be just like legally discriminated against as a basis of their weight and size. And so I would change that. And that would become a protected classification, just like, race and ethnicity and other things like that. We have a lot of things in place, or disability, but technically right now, and it happens all the time, actually, people are not hired for that reason. I mean, a lot of it's sort of subconscious, but it's really also explicit bias at play. So I think that would have a huge impact if people were really held to the standard of, having to be inclusive based on body difference.
I like it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Oh, where can people contact you? I think we've what you got going on.
Yeah, thanks. You can probably find me most easily on Instagram at Gallia Collaborative. We're pretty active there. Share all our new stuff. So
the website too is GALIA Collaborative as well.
.com. You got it. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was really fun.